At the bank, my son pushed a pen at me. "Just sign, Mom." His wife squeezed my shoulder until it hurt. I slipped the cashier a note. "Help. Not my choice." They smiled for the camera when suddenly the manager locked the door. "Before we continue, I just want to say thank you for taking the time to hear my story. If you're comfortable, let me know where you're listening from, and what time it is where you are. Now let me tell you my story. My name is Eleanor, and I am a widow in my 78th year. My life since my husband Robert passed has been one of quiet, ordered peace. My world had shrunk to the size of my small garden. The pages of my books and the weekly calls with my daughter Clara. It was a small world, but it was mine. I did not realize it was also a territory, a set of assets on a balance sheet, until my son Mark and his wife Vanessa began their campaign. It started subtly, gentle suggestions about my bookkeeping, casual remarks about the rising property taxes, offers to help simplify my accounts. I am not a fool, but I am a mother. I chose to believe in the goodness of my son, to see his concern as genuine, even as a cold knot of unease tightened in my stomach. The suggestions became more insistent, the visits more frequent and less social. They were meetings now, with Mark looking increasingly haggard and Vanessa's smiles growing brighter and more brittle. The morning they drove me to the bank was the culmination of weeks of this soft, suffocating pressure. The car smelled of Vanessa's perfume, an expensive cloying scent that seemed to suck the air from my lungs. She had insisted on driving, with me in the passenger seat and Mark in the back, a silent, miserable presence. The pop music she played on the radio was jarringly loud, a frantic, cheerful soundtrack to my mounting dread. "It's for the best, Eleanor," Vanessa said, reaching over and patting my knee with a hand that felt like a claw. "Once this is all sorted, you won't have to worry about a thing. Mark can handle everything for you." I looked at my reflection in the side window. I saw a frail-looking old woman with frightened eyes. Robert had always handled the finances. He had been meticulous, organized, and had left me more than secure. "Your mother is a smart woman, but let's make it easy for her," he used to say, showing me the neatly labeled files and consolidated statements. I knew my accounts. I knew my worth. My supposed confusion was a fiction they had invented to make their actions palatable. Inside the bank, the air conditioning was a cold shock. The space was vast and impersonal, the marble floors echoing the brisk, business-like clicks of people's shoes. Vanessa's hand was on my arm, her grip surprisingly strong, steering me not to one of the comfortable chairs in the waiting area, but directly to a cashier's window. Mark scurried ahead of us, carrying a thick leather briefcase. "We have an appointment," Vanessa announced to the young woman behind the counter, her voice radiating a cheerful authority that brooked no argument. The cashier, a young woman with dark, kind eyes and a name tag that read Sophia, gave me a small, questioning smile. I tried to smile back, but my lips felt stiff, uncooperative. Mark opened the briefcase on the counter, the latches clicking open with a sound like cell doors shutting. He pulled out a thick stack of papers, at least 20 pages, filled with a dense, incomprehensible legal jargon. He slid it in front of me alongside a heavy, expensive-looking pen. "It's all just standard stuff, Mom," he said, his voice low and rushed. He wouldn't look at me, his eyes fixed on a point somewhere over my shoulder. "It just gives me the ability to manage your accounts, pay your bills from my end. It makes things easier. Just sign here and here." He pointed to 2 yellow tabs marked with an X. Vanessa's other hand came to rest on my shoulder. She leaned in close, her voice a sweet, poisonous whisper in my ear. "We don't want to make a scene, do we, Eleanor? Let's just get this done so we can take you for a nice lunch." Her fingers began to squeeze, a slow, insistent pressure that sent a sharp pain radiating down my arm. It was a private, deniable act of violence, a perfect metaphor for all their manipulations. My heart hammered against my ribs. My hand trembled as I reached for the pen. This was it. This was the moment I lost everything. But as my fingers brushed against the cool metal of the pen, they also brushed against the small folded square of paper in my pocket. I had written it last night, sitting at my kitchen table in the dark, the words scrawled by the light of the street lamp outside. It had felt like a foolish, melodramatic gesture then. Now, it felt like the only weapon I had left. My eyes met Sophia's over the top of the papers. I saw a flicker of concern in her expression. In that split second I made my choice. "Oh dear," I said, my voice a quavering, theatrical whisper. I let the pen drop from my fingers. It rolled across the counter, as Vanessa and Mark both instinctively looked down at it. My other hand, the one hidden from their view, shot out. I pressed the folded note into Sophia's hand, my fingers briefly closing over hers. She didn't flinch, her hand simply closed over the note, and in a single fluid motion, slid it out of sight beneath her counter. There now, sweetheart. Don't you worry, Vanessa said, her voice dripping with false concern as she retrieved the pen. She smiled brightly towards the small black dome of the security camera on the ceiling. We're right here to help you. Mark forced a pained smile for the camera as well. They were the perfect, caring family. Sophia cleared her throat. I need to get my manager to witness this signature due to the nature of the document, she said, her voice impressively calm. One moment. She stepped away from her window. I held my breath. Had she read it? Would she do anything? A moment later, a man in a sharp suit was walking towards us. He was in his late 50s, with a calm, professional air. Good morning, he said. I'm Mr. Henderson, the branch manager. Sophia said you needed some assistance. My mother is just signing some papers to allow me to help with her estate, Mark explained, the lie sounding thin and rehearsed even to my own ears. Of course, Mr. Henderson said, his eyes not on Mark but on me. He gave me a brief, steady look. We just need to make sure everything is in order. Bank policy. He spoke with a practiced, reassuring calm. And as he did, I heard it. A sound that was both quiet and earth-shattering. A sharp, definitive click of the bank's magnetic locks engaging. A soft whirring sound as the mechanism sealed the heavy glass doors. The low ambient hum of the bank seemed to fall away into a sudden, shocked silence. The world seemed to hold its breath. Mark and Vanessa froze, their fake smiles plastered on their faces. They had walked me into a trap, but it was the doors of their own cage that had just been locked. The moment after the lock clicked shut was a tableau of suspended animation. The friendly smile on Vanessa's face didn't just fade, it dropped like a mask, revealing the hard, contemptuous lines of her true expression beneath. Her eyes, which had been crinkled in a performance of doting affection for the security cameras, narrowed into sharp, suspicious slits. She looked from the sealed glass doors to the impassive face of Mr. Henderson, and then with dawning horror to me. What did you do? She hissed, her voice a low, venomous sound meant only for my ears. The fingers on my shoulder, which had momentarily relaxed, tightened again, this time with a punishing, angry force. Mark, by contrast, seemed to shrink. The color drained from his face, leaving behind a pasty, clammy pallor. He licked his lips nervously and took a half-step towards the manager. His hands held up in a gesture of placating surrender. Sir, I'm sure this is just a misunderstanding, he stammered, his voice an octave higher than usual. It's just a standard security drill, right? If you could just let us know when it's over. We have a lunch reservation. Mr. Henderson regarded my son with a cool, unreadable expression. Yes, you could call it a security drill, he said, his voice smooth and utterly in command. Bank protocol for a potential Code 9 situation. We're just ensuring the safety and security of our clients. It shouldn't take long to resolve. Code 9. The term sounded official, vaguely menacing. It meant nothing to me, but I saw from the look on Mark's face that it was not a term one wanted to be associated with. He looked like he was about to be sick. The manager's calm, procedural tone was more intimidating than any shouting could have been. He was not emotional, he was in control. He had taken their power away with a single quiet action. The other customers in the bank had started to notice that something was amiss. Conversations had stopped, people were looking over at us, a small knot of drama unfolding in the center of the vast marble hall. If you'll all please come with me, Mr. Henderson said, his tone making it clear this was not a request. He gestured with an open hand towards a glass-walled office that stood in the center of the bank floor like a fishbowl. We can sort this out in the privacy of my office. The walk to that office was the longest of my life. I felt 100 pairs of eyes on us. I was no longer an invisible old woman. I was the epicenter of a public spectacle. Vanessa's hand was still on my arm, but her grip was now less about intimidation and more about preventing me from bolting, holding me as a hostage to her own failing plan. I could feel the furious vibrating tension in her body. Mark trailed behind us, looking like a schoolboy being marched to the principal's office. I felt a dizzying, terrifying cocktail of emotions. I was frightened of what was to come, of Vanessa's inevitable rage. But beneath the fear there was a small, unfamiliar flicker of something else. Power. For weeks I had been a passive victim in their quiet, domestic campaign of coercion. Now, with one small, desperate act, I had changed the venue. I had moved the battle from the privacy of my home to this public, regulated space. Their private manipulation was about to be exposed to the bright, unforgiving light of day. The office was exactly as it appeared from the outside, a cage of glass. Mr. Henderson held the door for me and I stepped inside, my legs feeling unsteady. Mark and Vanessa followed. The manager closed the door behind us, the soft click muffling the ambient sounds of the bank. We were separated from the world, yet on full display to it. Mr. Henderson's professionalism was a shield, a wall against which Mark's frantic explanations and Vanessa's simmering rage were useless. He sat behind his large tidy desk and looked at us, his expression calm and unreadable. "Now," he said, his voice quiet but firm, "let's talk about what's really going on." Inside the glass-walled office, Mr. Henderson's calm authority was absolute. He was the captain of this small, transparent ship, and we were at the mercy of his command. He didn't raise his voice, he didn't make accusations, he simply methodically took control. "Mr. and Mrs. Brooks," he said, his gaze fixed on Mark and Vanessa, "I'm going to need you to wait outside for a few moments. Please have a seat in the chairs just outside the door. I need to speak with your mother alone." "Now wait a minute," Vanessa started, her voice sharp with indignation. "She's confused. We are her legal caregivers and—" "You are not her legal caregivers," Mr. Henderson interrupted, his voice still quiet but now edged with steel. He gestured to the papers on his desk. "This document, which is not yet signed, is a power of attorney. Until it is legally executed, you have no more legal standing in this matter than I do. In fact, as her banker of 27 years, I likely have a more established fiduciary responsibility. Please wait outside." The cool factual dismissal left Vanessa speechless. She shot me a look of pure venom before turning on her heel and stalking out of the office. Mark, looking utterly defeated, mumbled a weak apology and followed her, closing the door behind him. Through the glass I watched them. It was a surreal experience, seeing my son and his wife as outsiders, their frantic whispered argument, a silent movie playing out for my benefit. Vanessa was rigid with fury, her hands gesturing wildly. Mark was a mess, his shoulders slumped, running his hands through his already disheveled hair. He looked trapped, and I realized with a pang of sorrow that he had been for a very long time, caught between his conscience and his wife's ambition. Mr. Henderson turned his full attention to me. He swiveled his chair so that he was facing me directly, creating a small private space between us. "Eleanor," he said, using my first name for the first time in all the years I had banked there. His voice was gentle. "Take a deep breath. You are safe here. Can you tell me what happened? In your own words." The simple act of being addressed with respect, of being asked for my own story, was enough to break the dam of fear and confusion I had been holding back for weeks. The words didn't come out in a flood. They came in a quiet, shaky torrent, punctuated by trembling breaths. I told him everything. I told him about the subtle pressure, the way they made me feel foolish and forgetful. I told him about their mounting financial troubles, which they spoke of in hushed, urgent tones when they thought I couldn't hear. I told him about the documents they had put in front of me, admitting I didn't understand the legal language but that I knew in my gut it was wrong. I told him about Vanessa's hand on my shoulder, about the fear of saying no, the fear of what they might do. I was so scared, I whispered, my voice cracking. I didn't know who to turn to. He listened without interruption, his expression never changing from one of calm, focused attention. He didn't offer platitudes or easy reassurances. He simply listened, and in doing so he gave me the greatest gift he possibly could. He believed me. The simple, profound act of being validated was like a balm on a raw wound. When I finished, he nodded slowly. "You did the right thing, Eleanor," he said. Passing that note took a great deal of courage. He picked up the receiver of his desk phone. "I need to make a phone call now. It's bank protocol. I'm going to contact our corporate security and fraud department. They have a direct liaison with the local police department, who specializes in these matters. It's all very discreet. But I want to be clear, this is no longer just a family dispute. You are alleging coercion, which is a serious crime." I watched as he made the call, his voice low and professional, relaying the essential facts of the situation. My mind was a whirlwind. A crime. The police. It all felt so unreal. I looked out through the glass at my son who I had held as a baby, whose scraped knees I had bandaged, whose report cards I had treasured. He was now on the other side of a wall of glass, about to be embroiled in a criminal investigation that I had initiated. Beneath my fear, a sharp, bitter wave of grief washed over me. No matter what happened next, my family, as I had known it, was broken forever. The wait for the police to arrive was the longest 10 minutes of my life. I remained in the office with Mr. Henderson, a silent protective barrier between me and my son. Mark and Vanessa continued their tense silent argument in the chairs outside. The rest of the bank operated in a state of suspended animation, the tellers serving customers with a forced professional calm, but everyone was aware of the drama unfolding in the glass fishbowl. The arrival of the police was not the loud siren-blaring affair I might have imagined from television. It was quiet, efficient, and deeply intimidating. 2 uniformed officers entered, their presence immediately changing the atmosphere of the bank from one of awkward tension to one of serious official gravity. One was a large, stoic-looking man, the other was a woman in her 40s with a calm, intelligent face and a compassionate but no-nonsense air about her. She was the one who approached the office. Mr. Henderson met her at the door. "Officer Diaz," he said with a nod of recognition. "Thank you for the prompt response." "Mr. Henderson," she replied, her gaze sweeping over the scene, taking in Mark and Vanessa, and then resting on me. "Let's see what we have here." She entered the office and introduced herself to me, her voice gentle. "Mom, my name is Officer Diaz. I'm here to help. I understand you're in a very difficult situation." Her kindness was a small island of comfort in a sea of turmoil. She asked me a few brief, clarifying questions, her manner reassuring and professional. She then turned her attention to the couple sitting outside. The power dynamic shifted again, decisively. Mark and Vanessa were no longer dealing with a bank manager, they were dealing with law enforcement. Officer Diaz's partner took Mark to one side of the bank, near the teller windows, while she herself approached Vanessa. I watched from the safety of the office as she began her questioning. I couldn't hear the words, but I could see the scene play out with a devastating clarity. Vanessa, who had been so confident, so in control, suddenly looked small and defensive. Her attempts at charming the officer were met with a blank professional stare. Her rehearsed story about my confusion was clearly not working. I saw Mark across the bank floor crumbling under the quiet, persistent questions from the other officer. His hands were shaking. He kept looking over at Vanessa as if for guidance, but she was trapped in her own interrogation. Their united front, so carefully constructed, had been shattered by the simple act of separating them. I had come to the bank that morning as a victim, a frail old woman being led to her financial slaughter. Now, I sat in the manager's chair watching as the system I had activated with one small desperate note began to dismantle my son and daughter-in-law's web of lies. It was a terrifying, heartbreaking, and strangely empowering spectacle. The world had been turned upside down, and for the first time in weeks I was the one who was finally on solid ground. The aftermath of the police arrival was a blur of calm, methodical procedure that stood in stark contrast to the emotional chaos of the preceding hour. I was the eye of the hurricane, shielded by Officer Diaz's quiet competence while the storm of consequences began to swirl around Mark and Vanessa. After their initial separate questioning, it was clear to the officers that there was more than enough cause to launch a formal investigation. "Eleanor," Officer Diaz said to me, her voice gentle but firm as she knelt before me in the manager's office. "We're going to get you home and make sure you're safe. We can't let you go home with your son today. Do you understand?" I nodded, a fresh wave of grief washing over me. The finality of it, I would not be going home with my son. The simple everyday fabric of my life was being irrevocably rewoven. "What will happen to them?" I asked, my voice a whisper. "For now, they'll be taken to the station for a more formal interview," she explained. "They are not under arrest at this time, but they are persons of interest in a potential felony investigation. They will be released, but there will be conditions." The drive to my house was a surreal journey. I sat in the passenger seat of Officer Diaz's patrol car, the quiet hum of the engine a world away from the frantic pop music Vanessa had played just hours before. The familiar suburban streets of my neighborhood looked alien, as if I were seeing them for the first time. When we arrived, another police car was already there and a man in a jumpsuit was standing on my porch. "We've called a locksmith, ma'am," Officer Diaz explained as she helped me out of the car. "With your permission, we'd like to change the locks on all your doors. It's a precaution." I gave my permission, feeling like a stranger at my own front door. I watched as the old lock, the one my husband Robert had installed 30 years ago, was drilled out and replaced with a new shiny brass one. It was a necessary violation, a symbolic act of reclaiming my space from those who had sought to invade it. Inside, Officer Diaz helped me get an emergency protective order. She used her laptop to connect with an on-call judge, and within 20 minutes it was done. A legal document now existed that barred Mark and Vanessa from coming within 100 yards of me, my home or my car. It was a shield, a piece of paper that held the force of law, but it felt like a declaration of war against my own child. After the locksmith and the other officer had left, Officer Diaz made me a cup of tea. She sat with me at my kitchen table, the same table where Mark and Vanessa had laid out their plans and pressured me for weeks. The hardest part for many people in your situation, Eleanor, she said, her voice full of a wisdom born from experience, is the guilt. You might feel like you've betrayed them, like you've broken up your own family, but you need to remember, they made their choices. You just made the choice to protect yourself. You did nothing wrong. Her words were a kindness I desperately needed to hear. After she left, I was truly alone for the first time in what felt like months. The silence in the house was immense, a living presence. It was no longer the tense, watchful silence of waiting for their next visit, their next request. It was a new kind of silence, peaceful but also profoundly lonely. Every corner of the house held a memory of Mark as a boy, a teenager, a young man, a pencil mark on a doorframe, measuring his height. A small faded photograph on the mantelpiece of him at his college graduation. I had lost not just the son he had become, but the memory of the son he once was, now tainted by this terrible betrayal. The cracks in their united front appeared almost immediately. My daughter Clara, who lives in Oregon, had a standing call with me every Tuesday evening. I told her everything that had happened, my voice shaking as I recounted the events at the bank. She was silent for a long moment, and then I heard her take a sharp, furious breath. That woman, Clara seethed, her voice a low growl of protective rage. I knew she was a snake from the day Mark brought her home. Mom, I'm booking a flight. I'll be there tomorrow. Before she could get here, however, the fallout began to rain down. The next afternoon, I received a frantic call from my other son, David, Clara's twin brother. Mom, Mark just called me, he said, his voice a mixture of anger and bewilderment. He was a complete wreck, sobbing, incoherent. He said, "You had them arrested, that you've ruined their lives." He kept saying it was all Vanessa's idea, that she pushed him into it. Then he'd switch and say you were being cruel and selfish, that you were tearing the family apart. It was a mess. It sounds like they are at each other's throats. The image of my son, so broken and lost, sent a pang of maternal pain through me, a pain that was immediately followed by a cold wave of anger. He was not the victim here. He had made his bed. The first direct attack from them came a day later, and it was as cruel as I could have imagined. Mark called me, a clear violation of the protective order. I saw his name on the caller ID, and my heart lurched. A part of me, the foolish, motherly part, hoped it was a call of apology, of remorse. I was wrong. Mom, he began, his voice thick with tears. It was a sound he had used as a boy to get his way, a sound that had always been my weakness. Mom, you have to stop this. You have to call the police and tell them it was all a misunderstanding. I can't do that, Mark, I said, my voice trembling but firm. You know it wasn't. But you don't understand, he cried, his voice rising in desperation. Vanessa, she's going crazy. She says they're going to press charges, that we'll lose the house. She says if I go to jail, you'll never see Thomas and Lily again. The threat, when it came, was like a physical blow. My grandchildren, my sweet, innocent grandchildren. I pictured their faces, their laughter, the way Lily's small hand felt in mine. They miss you, Mom, he sobbed. You're their grandmother. Please, don't do this to them. Don't tear this family apart. He hung up, leaving me shaking, his words a toxic poison seeping into my heart. He had used my deepest love as a weapon against me. The battle was no longer just about money, or legal documents. It was now about the future of my family, and the price of my own safety might just be the loss of my grandchildren. The full, ugly scope of my son's betrayal came into focus a few days later. Officer Diaz returned to my house, this time accompanied by a social worker named Anna, a gentle woman with kind, intelligent eyes. They sat with me at my kitchen table and laid out the documents from the bank. Eleanor, we've had our financial crimes unit analyze these papers, Officer Diaz began, her tone serious. We wanted you to understand exactly what you were being asked to sign. I thought I knew. I had assumed it was a loan application, or perhaps a document giving Mark access to one of my accounts. The reality was far more sinister. Anna slid the top document in front of me, pointing to the title at the top of the page. "This is an irrevocable power of attorney," she explained softly. "This wouldn't have just given Mark the ability to pay your bills. It would have given him, and by extension his wife, total and complete control over every aspect of your life. He could have sold your house, liquidated your investments, changed your will, even made medical decisions for you. And the irrevocable part means you could never have taken that power back without a lengthy, expensive court battle." I stared at the dense block of text, my blood running cold. They hadn't just wanted my money. They had wanted my life. They had wanted to render me powerless. A ward in my own home, while they dismantled the security my husband and I had spent a lifetime building. "That's not all," Officer Diaz said, her voice grim. She pointed to another document. "This form authorizes the immediate liquidation of the educational trust fund you established for your grandchildren, Thomas and Lily." This was the blow that took my breath away. That trust was sacred. Robert and I had started it when the children were born. It was our legacy to them. A guarantee of their future. The thought that Mark would be willing to steal from his own children, to sacrifice their future to solve his present problems, was a betrayal so profound it almost defied comprehension. "They were in deep financial trouble, Eleanor," Anna said gently. "We've looked into their finances. A high-risk business venture of Vanessa's failed and they've been hiding massive debts for almost a year. They were on the verge of foreclosure. This wasn't just a moment of poor judgment. This was a calculated, desperate plan to seize your assets and use them to cover their own mistakes." I looked down at the papers, at the cold hard proof of my son's intentions. All the weeks of gaslighting, of being made to feel foolish and confused, suddenly snapped into sharp, painful focus. My supposed decline was a narrative they had constructed to justify their crime. My home was not just a home, it was real estate. My savings were not a nest egg. They were a bailout, and I, their mother and grandmother, was not a person to be loved and respected, but an obstacle to be managed and ultimately erased. Officer Diaz's words about guilt from her first visit came back to me. In that moment, sitting at my sun-drenched kitchen table, any vestige of guilt I might have felt vanished, burned away by a cold, hard wave of anger. This was not a family dispute that had gotten out of hand. This was a calculated attack. And the threat to use my grandchildren against me was not the desperate plea of a loving father, it was the tactic of a hostage-taker. My resolve, which had been wavering under the weight of Mark's emotional blackmail, solidified into something as hard and unyielding as granite. This was no longer just about protecting myself, it was about protecting the future of two innocent children from the greed and cowardice of their own parents. I would not back down. I would not drop the charges. I would see this through to the very end. The days that followed were a strange mixture of legal maneuvering and quiet solitude. My daughter, Clara, arrived like a force of nature, a whirlwind of protective fury. She immediately took charge, her practical no-nonsense energy a welcome antidote to the chaos. She had my husband's clear-headedness, and I had never been more grateful for it. She handled the calls from lawyers, she organized my paperwork, and she acted as a fierce, unbreachable wall between me and the outside world. Her presence did not, however, stop the family schism from deepening. The conflict was a fault line that ran straight through our history, splitting us into factions. Clara's first phone call with Mark was a blistering, ugly affair. I could hear her voice from the other room, low and furious, and I could imagine my son on the other end, weeping and making his pathetic excuses. "Don't you dare try to blame Vanessa for this, Mark," I heard her say, her voice dripping with a lifetime of sibling frustration. "You stood there. You held the pen, you let her do this to our mother. You are a grown man and you made a choice. And now you have to live with it." The call ended with Clara telling him, in no uncertain terms, that he was to have no further contact with me, and that she would be his only point of contact from now on. The line between my sons had been drawn in stone. My other son, David, who was quieter and more reserved than Clara, was equally devastated. He called me every night, his voice filled with a pained disbelief. "How could he do this, Mom?" he would ask, a question for which I had no answer. The betrayal had not just wounded me, it had wounded them all, shattering their perception of the brother they thought they knew. In the midst of this family turmoil, I received an unexpected visitor. Mr. Henderson, the bank manager, called first to ask if it would be all right for him to stop by. He needed to provide a formal witness statement for the police, and he offered to come to my home to save me the trip. I agreed, grateful for the small kindness. He arrived on a Saturday afternoon, dressed not in his severe bank suit, but in a casual sweater and slacks. After he had finished with the official business, signing his statement with Officer Diaz, who was also present, he lingered. "If you have a moment, Eleanor," he said, his tone hesitant, "I'd like to speak with you for a moment, not as a bank manager." We sat on my back porch, overlooking the garden Robert had so lovingly tended. For a long moment he was silent, looking at my rosebushes. "My father," he began finally, his voice quiet. "He was a lot like you, independent, sharp, proud. After my mother passed, he got lonely. He made a new friend, a charming widow who moved in down the street. We all thought she was wonderful. She brought him casseroles, took him to his appointments, and over the course of a year she scammed him out of his entire life savings." I listened, my heart aching for this kind, quiet man. "We found out too late," he continued, his eyes distant with the memory. "By the time we realized what was happening, the money was gone, and so was she. The hardest part was the shame. My father was so ashamed that he had been fooled, that he had let it happen. He never really recovered from that. It wasn't the loss of the money that broke him. It was the loss of his trust, his dignity." He turned to look at me, his gaze direct and full of a deep, empathetic understanding. "These people, whether they're strangers or your own family, they count on that. They count on us being too polite, too embarrassed or too scared to make a scene. What you did in that bank, Eleanor, writing that note, taking that risk, that was an act of incredible bravery. You didn't just save your money, you saved your dignity. Please don't ever forget that." His words and the quiet personal story behind them were a profound gift. He had seen past the specifics of my situation and understood the universal ugly mechanics of elder abuse. He was not just a witness in my legal case. He had become a quiet, unexpected friend, a steadying presence in the storm. His visit was a reminder that while my own family was being torn apart by betrayal, kindness and decency could still be found in the most unexpected of places. Just as I began to feel a fragile sense of control, Vanessa launched her next most vicious counterattack. It was a legal maneuver so cruel, so perverse in its logic that it left me breathless. Her lawyer filed a formal petition with the court to have me declared mentally incompetent. The documents, which Clara intercepted before I could see them, were a work of pure malicious fiction. They painted a picture of me as a confused, paranoid old woman, suffering from the advanced stages of dementia. The petition alleged that I was no longer capable of managing my own affairs, and was being unduly influenced by my favored child, Clara, who it claimed, was systematically alienating me from my devoted son, Mark, in order to seize control of my estate for herself. It was a brilliant, twisted strategy. It took the very real situation of my son's betrayal, and flipped it on its head, recasting him as the victim and me as the unstable, manipulated puppet. To support these claims they had attached evidence. There were edited audio clips from old voicemail messages, snippets of conversations where I sounded tired or momentarily forgetful, skillfully stitched together to create a narrative of cognitive decline. Even more cruelly, they had managed to get statements from two of my neighbors. One was a woman I had always found a bit flighty, the other an elderly man who was himself quite forgetful. I could imagine Vanessa in the weeks leading up to the bank incident, paying them special attention, stopping by with a warm smile and a basket of muffins, planting seeds of concern about my well-being. "Eleanor seems so scattered lately, don't you think? I'm so worried about her." I could almost hear her saying, and these neighbors, meaning no real harm, had likely signed affidavits simply confirming that yes, I had seemed a bit more tired than usual. In the cold legal language of the court filing, their mild observations were magnified into proof of my senility. The petition demanded an immediate competency hearing and the appointment of a court-mandated guardian to oversee my affairs until a verdict could be reached. That guardian, they audaciously suggested, should be a neutral third party but one approved by their firm. "She's trying to take away your voice," Clara said, her voice shaking with a rage so profound it was almost silent. "If she can get you declared incompetent, then your testimony against her is worthless. She can claim you were confused, that you imagined the whole thing at the bank. She's not just trying to get your money, Mom. She's trying to erase you." The psychological toll of this new attack was immense. It was one thing to be accused of being a bad mother. It was another to have my very sanity, my perception of reality, put on trial. I began to second-guess myself. Had I forgotten a conversation? Did I sound confused on the phone? Vanessa's poison was insidious. It made me question my own mind just as she had been trying to do for months. While we were reeling from this new legal assault, the police investigation was quietly bearing fruit. Officer Diaz called Clara and told her they had executed a search warrant for Mark and Vanessa's financial records. What they found was a story of staggering incompetence and desperate deceit. The high-end interior design business Vanessa had started with a loan from a shady online lender had been a catastrophic failure. She had spent lavishly on a fancy showroom and expensive inventory but had secured almost no clients. For nearly a year they had been living a lie, funding their mortgage and lifestyle by juggling credit cards and taking out more high-interest loans to pay off the old ones. They were trapped in a debt spiral, and bankruptcy was imminent. The investigation had also uncovered the price of their lies. A forensic accountant had found a credit card application from 6 months prior. It was a card with a high limit, the one they had used to keep their heads above water for the last few months. The primary applicant was me. The signature at the bottom was a clumsy but passable forgery of my own. That small desperate act of fraud was the key. It was the prelude to the drama at the bank. They had already crossed a criminal line, and they knew it. The power of attorney wasn't just a plan to get more money, it was a gambit to get legal control over my finances so they could retroactively hide their previous crime, burying the forgery under a mountain of legitimate-looking transactions they could execute in my name. This discovery was a crucial piece of leverage for our side. It proved a pattern of criminal intent. It demonstrated that their actions were not a one-time mistake born of desperation, but an escalating series of calculated crimes. But it was a cold comfort. The legal system moves at a glacial pace. The competency hearing was scheduled first. Before I could be a witness against them, I first had to prove to the court that I was a reliable narrator of my own life. The day of the competency hearing was the day I had been dreading most. It felt like the ultimate violation, a public trial of my own mind. I sat in the sterile, imposing courtroom, a place that felt a universe away from my quiet life, and listened as a lawyer I had never met, a man hired by my son's wife, stood before a judge and methodically attempted to dismantle my reality. He presented the edited audio clips, my own voice sounding tired and disjointed, a caricature of senility. He read the statements from my neighbors, their mundane observations twisted into a diagnosis of my decline. He painted a picture of me as a confused, vulnerable old woman, easily swayed by my scheming daughter, Clara. I sat there, my hands clasped tightly in my lap, and felt a strange sense of detachment, as if I were watching a play about someone else's life. I saw my grandchildren Thomas and Lily in the hallway during a brief recess. Vanessa had brought them a calculated, cruel piece of theater. They looked lost and frightened in the cavernous, somber courthouse. They waved timidly at me and my heart broke all over again. Vanessa was using them as props, as silent emotional blackmail. Finally, it was my turn to take the stand. My legs felt weak as I walked to the witness box. But as I sat down and looked out at the room, a strange calm settled over me. I saw Clara and my son David, their faces radiating a fierce, unconditional support. I saw Mr. Anderson from the bank, who had come to be a silent witness on my behalf, and I saw Mark and Vanessa sitting at their table. Vanessa was whispering instructions to her lawyer, her face a mask of cold confidence. Mark, however, looked ill. He was pale and sweating, and he couldn't bring himself to look at me. Vanessa's lawyer approached me, his smile a predatory, condescending thing. "Mrs. Brooks," he began, his voice dripping with false sympathy, "let's talk about your finances. It's a lot to keep track of at your age, isn't it? The bills, the investments, it can be quite overwhelming." "I manage," I said, my voice clearer and stronger than I expected. "But wouldn't you agree that it would be easier if your loving son Mark were to help you with these complex matters?" "My son Mark tried to have me sign away control of my entire life," I replied, my gaze steady. "That is not what I would call help. He tried to trip me up, asking me rapid-fire questions about specific dates, old bank statements, and past conversations. He was trying to create the confusion he had claimed already existed. But I found a strength I didn't know I possessed. I answered each question calmly, simply, and truthfully. I was not a confused old woman. I was a mother who had been betrayed, and I would not let them erase my voice. The turning point came not from a brilliant legal argument, but from a simple human moment of reckoning. The lawyer had called Mark to the stand, intending for him to corroborate their story of my decline. As my son walked past me, his face was ashen. He took the stand, was sworn in and sat down, his eyes fixed on the wooden railing in front of him, refusing to look at me, at his wife, at anyone. Vanessa's lawyer began. "Mr. Brooks, you've been concerned about your mother's cognitive state for some time, haven't you?" Mark was silent for a long moment. I could see the internal war raging in his face. He was at a crossroads, a final terrible choice laid bare before him. "Mr. Brooks?" the lawyer prompted, a note of irritation in his voice. Mark finally looked up. He didn't look at the lawyer. He didn't look at Vanessa. He looked at me, and in his eyes, I saw not a villain but my son, my lost, broken, and deeply ashamed son. The lie, it seemed, was one he could no longer bear to tell. "No," he said, his voice cracking, the single word echoing in the silent courtroom. "No, my mother is as sharp as a tack. She always has been." A shocked murmur went through the room. Vanessa stiffened, her face a mask of disbelief and fury. Her lawyer looked stunned. Mark stammered, his composure crumbling completely. He turned to the judge, his eyes filling with tears. "I did a terrible thing. We were in trouble, financially. Vanessa. She came up with the plan, to get power of attorney. I knew it was wrong, but I was weak. I was a coward. I went along with it. We tried to force her to sign papers she didn't want to sign, but I will not sit here and lie about my mother's mind. I will not do that. She is not the one who is sick. I am." His confession, so raw and so complete, hung in the air, a devastating, irrefutable truth. The carefully constructed artifice of Vanessa's case had been obliterated, not by a lawyer but by the one thing she had never counted on, the last, tattered remnant of her husband's conscience. Mark's confession was the moment the war ended. The competency petition was not just dismissed, it was thrown out with a scathing rebuke from the judge, who made it clear she viewed the entire motion as a malicious and fraudulent abuse of the legal process. The house of cards Vanessa had so carefully constructed had been brought down by the one person she thought she controlled completely. In the aftermath, the legal system, which had seemed so slow and indifferent, moved with a sudden, decisive speed. With Mark's testimony and the evidence of the forged credit card application, the criminal case against Vanessa was no longer a matter of investigation. It was a certainty. She was arrested, her face a mask of cold, silent fury as Officer Diaz led her from the courthouse. For his cooperation, the district attorney offered Mark a plea deal. He would plead guilty to lesser charges, receiving probation and mandatory community service instead of jail time. It was a mercy he perhaps didn't deserve, but one I was quietly grateful for. The thought of both my son and his wife in prison was a tragedy I could barely comprehend. The judge made the emergency protective order permanent. The family court, in a separate and swift ruling, assigned a mediator to handle all communication regarding my grandchildren. All visits were to be supervised by Clara, ensuring that the children could never again be used as pawns in their parents' destructive games. My life was returned to me. The legal documents, the court dates, the constant grinding fear, it was all over. I was free, but it was a freedom freighted with the heavy wreckage of what had been lost. The months that followed were a period of quiet, painful rebuilding. The house was mine again, a true sanctuary, but the silence was often heavy with the ghosts of my broken family. Clara stayed with me for another month, helping me navigate the bewildering aftermath, her steadfast presence a constant source of comfort. My relationship with my grandchildren was the most delicate part of the mending process. The first few supervised visits were awkward and sad. They were confused, their young minds unable to grasp the full scope of what their parents had done. But children are resilient. Under Clara's gentle guidance and my steady, unconditional love, the awkwardness began to fade, replaced by the familiar, easy affection we had once shared. We started new traditions, found new ways to laugh. We were building a new kind of family, one step at a time. The relationship with my son Mark was the great, unresolved wound in my heart. He was legally forbidden from contacting me directly, a restriction that felt both like a necessary shield and a profound, unnatural tragedy. A few weeks after the verdict, the first letter arrived. It was addressed in his familiar, slightly sloppy handwriting. I recognized it with a jolt that was equal parts anger and a deep, maternal sorrow. I did not open it. I could not. I put it in a small wooden box on my mantelpiece, the one where I kept old important papers. Another letter came a few weeks later, and another after that. He was in therapy, Clara told me. He was working a menial job to start paying off his debts. He was trying in his own broken way to take responsibility for his life. The letters kept coming, a steady, one-sided correspondence with a mother he could no longer speak to. The box on the mantelpiece began to fill. The final scene of my long, arduous story unfolded, not in a courtroom or a bank, but here, in the quiet solitude of my own garden. It is late spring, 6 months after the verdict. The roses Robert planted are in full glorious bloom, their scent a sweet familiar comfort. The legal storm has passed. Vanessa has been convicted and is serving a short prison sentence. The financial wounds are healing, slowly. My life has settled into a new quiet rhythm. I am sitting on my porch, a cup of tea growing cold beside me. The mail has just come, and with it another letter from Mark. It sits on the small table in front of me, his familiar handwriting a silent, persistent question. The box on my mantelpiece is now full of its unopened companions. My grandchildren are coming to visit this afternoon. Clara will bring them. We are going to bake cookies and plant new tomato seedlings in the garden. Life is moving forward. The future is no longer a landscape of fear, but one of quiet, simple possibilities. I look at the letter. I think of the son who betrayed me, the coward who finally found the courage to tell the truth. I think of the long, painful road of forgiveness, a road I am not yet sure I am ready to walk. But for the first time in a long, long time, the choice is entirely, completely mine. I am no longer a victim being steered and coerced. I am the matriarch of my own life, the keeper of my own peace. I pick up the letter. I hold it in my hands, feeling the weight of all the unspoken words within. The sun is warm on my face. A gentle breeze rustles the leaves of the old oak tree in the yard. The future is uncertain, but for the first to me, it feels like my own. I have my story back, and I alone will decide how the next chapter is written.